This is Beyond the Business.
Over the past 3 decades, governments around the world have built an entire framework designed to control air pollution. International agreements, environmental regulations, carbon markets, emissions testing. From the Kyoto Protocol in 1997 to the Paris Agreement in 2015, the goal has been clear. Measure emissions, control them, reduce them. But almost as soon as the first climate markets appeared in the late 1990s, regulators encountered an unexpected problem. The system relied on numbers, and numbers can be manipulated. One of the earliest scandals involved carbon trading systems in Europe during the mid 2000s, where traders exploited weaknesses in emission markets to carry out large-scale carbon credit tax fraud schemes worth billions of euros. Even before the global climate architecture fully matured, the system was already revealing its vulnerabilities. Because every environmental framework depends on something fundamental: measurement. Emissions must be counted, verified, reported. But once pollution becomes a number inside a system, that number becomes negotiable. Technology can hide emissions, markets can distort incentives, and financial instruments can transform pollution into something that exists more on paper than in reality. Today, I will examine three of the most revealing cases, what could be called air fraud. Three moments where environmental rules existed, but the rules were deliberately bypassed, not through accidents, but through design. Air fraud rarely appears in a single form. Sometimes companies manipulate technology. Sometimes they manipulate economic incentives. And sometimes manipulation appears inside the very systems designed to compensate emissions. The three cases I will examine reveal these different forms: technology, markets, and offsets. Case 1: Dieselgate. To understand the first case, we begin with one of the largest automotive manufacturers in the world, Volkswagen Group. Founded in Germany in 1937, Volkswagen eventually grew into a global automotive empire. Today, the group includes brands such as Audi, Porsche, Skoda, Seat, Bentley, Lamborghini. By the early 2000s, Volkswagen had a strategic ambition to dominate the global diesel vehicle market. The company launched a major marketing campaign promoted what it called clean diesel. The idea was simple. Diesel engines could deliver high fuel efficiency and lower carbon dioxide emissions. If they could also meet strict environmental standards, they would become the perfect bridge between traditional combustion engines and future low carbon technologies. Millions of consumers believed this promise. But diesel engines had a major drawback. They produced higher levels of the nitrogen oxides known as a NOx. These pollutants contribute to smog and severe respiratory illnesses. To sell diesel vehicles in the United States and Europe, manufacturers had to comply with the strict emission regulations. And this is where the manipulation began. Inside certain Volkswagen diesel models, engineers installed a software capable of detecting when the car was undergoing official emissions testing. During laboratory tests, the software activated a special low emissions mode. But once the vehicle returned to normal driving conditions, the system switched off. Under real driving conditions, some vehicles emitted 10 to 40 times more nitrogen oxides than permitted by environmental regulations. For several years, these cars passed emissions tests. Consumers believed they were buying environmentally friendly diesel technology. Regulators believed the standards were being met. But independent researchers began noticing inconsistencies. In 2014, scientists at West Virginia University conducted real-world emissions testing on diesel vehicles. Their results revealed enormous discrepancies between laboratory emissions data and real road performance. Regulators launched an investigation. In September 2015, the truth became public. Volkswagen had installed defeat devices in the millions of vehicles. The scale of the scandal was unprecedented. Approximately 11 million vehicles worldwide were affected. The consequences were enormous. Volkswagen faced global lawsuits, criminal investigations, and regulatory penalties. In total, the company ultimately paid more than $30 billion in fines, settlements, and compensations. Several executives were prosecuted, and the automotive industry was forced to rethink how emissions testing works. Dieselgate became one of the most famous environmental fraud cases in modern industrial history. But manipulation of environmental systems did not stop with technology. The case 2. The second case moves from engines to economics. Under the Kyoto Protocol, governments introduced a new idea. One of the most important mechanisms was the Clean Development Mechanism, or CDM. The system worked like this. If a project in a developing country reduced greenhouse gas emissions, it could generate carbon credits. These credits could be purchased by companies or governments needing to offset their own emissions. In theory, the system would encourage investments in a cleaner technology. But one particular industrial gas created an unexpected opportunity. The gas is called HFC-23. HFC-23 is a byproduct produced during the manufacturing of certain refrigerants. It is also one of the most powerful greenhouse gases ever measured. Over a 100-year period, its warming potential is approximately 14,800 times greater than carbon dioxide. Because the gas was so potent, destroying even small quantities generated extremely large numbers of carbon credits. Soon, several chemical plants in China and India began participating in this project. At first, the system appeared highly successful. Factories destroyed the gas and earned carbon credits. Companies around the world purchased those credits to offset emissions. But investigators eventually noticed something unusual. Some factories appeared to be increasing production of the refrigerants that generated HFC-23. The more HFC-23 that was produced, the more could be destroyed. And the more that was destroyed, the more carbon credits were issued. At one point, nearly half of all carbon credits issued under the Clean Development Mechanism came from HFC-23 destruction projects. The financial incentives were enormous. In some cases, destroying the gas generated more revenue than the main industrial product of the factory itself. In effect, the system designed to reduce emissions created a financial incentive to generate additional pollution. Eventually, regulators intervened. Certain HFC-23 projects were removed from carbon markets. But the case revealed something fundamental. When pollution becomes a tradable commodity, the incentives surrounding that commodity can produce unexpected and sometimes counterproductive outcomes. Case 3. The third case shifts the focus from factories to forests, and the global climate initiatives such as REDD+, projects could generate carbon credits by protecting forests from deforestation. The logic was appealing. Trees absorb carbon dioxide. If a forest remains standing, the carbon stored in its biomass stays out of the atmosphere. Preventing deforestation could therefore generate carbon credits. Companies could purchase those credits to compensate for their own emissions. Over time, forests offset became one of the largest segments of the voluntary carbon market. But the credibility of these projects eventually came under scrutiny. In 2023, investigative journalists from The Guardian, Dieselgate, and Source Material analyzed a large number of forest carbon offset projects certified under the Verra standard. The investigation focused on how carbon savings were calculated. To issue carbon credits, projects must estimate how much deforestation would occur without the project. This hypothetical scenario becomes the baseline used to calculate emissions reductions. But investigators found that in many cases those baselines were highly exaggerated. Some forests were credited for preventing deforestation that was unlikely to occur. If the forest would have remained intact anyway, the claimed carbon savings existed only on paper. Some analysis suggested that up to 90% of certain forest carbon credits may not represent real emissions reductions. This raised serious concerns about the credibility of voluntary carbon markets. If companies purchase offsets that don't correspond to real environmental outcomes, emissions may decline on the corporate reports while remain unchanged in the atmosphere. These three cases reveal different forms of environmental manipulation. In the first case, emissions were hidden inside technology. In the second, economic incentives reshaped industrial behavior. In the third, environmental benefits were calculated using uncertain assumptions. But all three cases reveal the same structural vulnerability. Environmental systems depend on measurement, transparency, and trust. When those elements are distorted, the entire framework becomes fragile. Environmental policy attempts to regulate pollution through rules. But the moment pollution becomes a number inside a system, the system itself becomes a part of the problem. It would be easy to assume that such violations occur only because companies pursue profit. But the reality is more complicated. Industries operate under regulatory pressure. Technological solutions are not always available. And economic systems often move faster than policy frameworks. Yet environmental rules exist for a reason. They protect something fundamental. The air people breathe. If the rules no longer work, they should evolve. If they are too rigid, they should be improved. But until they change, they remain the rules of the game. And the atmosphere depends on those rules being respected. Because once pollution becomes measurable, it also becomes negotiable. And when pollution becomes negotiable, someone will eventually try to manipulate the numbers.